10 years ago, I was a refugee. I made so many mistakes. I was called stupid so many times. I knew English from Eminem and 50 Cent. To be comfortable speaking with you right now, it took me years.
People look at me weird, and I didn't have the refugees, like
You don't have that excuse, right?
I had no excuse, I was just bad. If you don't ask, then you never know.
People ask you who's gonna pay for it. It's a huge question in healthcare. Going through the FDA is not easy. You have to say the right thing at the right time, and you have to get the professionals really involved and early on. It's a crazy process.
How many investors did you kind of nurture or reach out to and try to build those relationships with, and how many ended up actually investing in the business?
So there was...
Welcome to episode 17 of Fundraising Demystified, a podcast where we uncover the untold stories of startup founders who have raised venture capital to bring their visions to life. Join me, Jason Kirby, as I interview these founders and dive into the hidden truths of how they got funded. Today, we have Mustafa, a refugee turned PhD graduate and now co-founder and CEO of Aztec Diagnostics, a rapid antibiotic sensitivity test company that's raised a $2 million seed round. We're going to dive into his inspiring journey of fleeing his home country as a refugee, learning German to be able to pursue a degree, and then coming to the U.S. as a PhD candidate, only to pursue the American dream of starting his own company. We're going to learn about why he started this company and how he got into Y Combinator, which led to him raising his seed round. It's an inspiring story you do not want to miss. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Your host, Jason Kirby here with Fundraising Demystified. And today we have Mustafa joining us, co-founder and CEO of Aztec Diagnostics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you on the show. Excited to learn more about Aztec. But let's just go ahead and have you tell a little bit of background on what Aztec Diagnostics is and how you conceptualize the idea for the business.
Yeah, so we have developed a rapid antibiotic sensitivity test. So every time you go to a doctor and you get an antibiotic, it's a guess. Physicians are guessing that you have a bacterial infection, and they're guessing that the specific antibiotic will actually work. A couple of years ago, my grandfather kind of went delirious overnight, and we had no idea what was going on. It was later discovered that he had a UTI, and it took doctors 4 days to determine what antibiotic to give him. In the meantime, he had fallen, broken his hip. He had no idea who anyone was, and that really changed his life forever. So that day, I thought, I had this idea. Might as well try to make it happen. If anything, it's for my own grandfather. And that's why our product is called the Jiddu. This is what I called my grandfather growing up.
Yeah, wow. That's quite the personal origin story for solving a very important problem to you, and that's impacted you and your family. So I guess kind of walk us through like a little bit about your technical or research background that allowed you to be capable of kind of pursuing this field and pursuing a product like this.
Yeah, so I have a PhD in mechanical engineering with a focus on blood hemodynamics. So I studied the sedimentation rate of blood. So I always was close to the biomedical field. And on the side, I was doing this project where we were trying to detect bacteria in water. I'm from Iraq, and in Iraq, we had cholera. So, right in the news, hey, some people are dying of cholera, and I was like, hey, maybe I could help solve that. So we built this device, and by the end, I took it to a friend who worked at the UNHCR. I was like, hey, we can detect cholera in water, and he was like, we have these straws that are called life straws. They filter out bacteria. So even if there's cholera, really, we don't care to know because they're filtered out. So my whole idea of that kind of went out the window. So I went back. I was doing a PhD at that point, and, one thing led to another. And, my grandfather got sick, and we pivoted into doing, diagnostics.
Gotcha. And so basically seeing this process, having an idea, didn't work out, pivot to a new solution. At what point did this idea come about and you guys, started the process of actually building the product and building the company?
Yeah, so the idea was there, and then I decided the second I graduate, I need to pursue this full-time. So that was May of 2020. So that's when I got the first investment check for Aztec, and we decided to, my co-founder and I, we decided that we should just do this full time and focus on it. And one of the biggest things that we accomplished is, in the pandemic, in my basement, within 1 year, we were able to build a prototype that was actually verified in a clinical setting on blood, even harder than urine. We're doing urine now mostly, but we did it on blood. So that's was the biggest accomplishment.
Wow. And so you set up basically a facility in your lab in your basement is effectively what you guys did to kind of get to this kind of stage.
Well, I wouldn't call it a facility. So a couple of things. So prior to Aztec, I had invented a method to bond acrylic sheets without affecting the specifications of acrylic, right? So the idea is all you need is alcohol and oven, right? So in my basement, I have alcohol, right? Check. My wife's kitchen, I have an oven, check. The only thing that was missing is because we're doing microfluidics is I needed to engrave on this plastic sheet. So what we ended up doing is, have you seen these engraving pens? They're like for jewelry. So we started with getting these. We buy plastic, we engrave it, put some alcohol on it, just compress it, put it in the oven, and this is how we built our microfluidics. But then on the other hand, Kevin is a software developer, so his life was a little bit easier. So he built the software, I built the hardware, and that's how we got our first prototype.
Wow. So it sounds like finding the right co-founder was an important part to this.
Absolutely.
And walk people through the process of, all right, you get a prototype, you have something here, you're raising a little bit of money. How did you get your first outside capital, and how much did you raise, and kind of what was that experience? How did you find those investors?
Yeah, so early on, I knew what I was going to do once I graduate. So I spent the last year of graduate school kind of cultivating these relationships. So I tried to, present at places and the business idea, just get to meet people, have some coffee chats, because one of the biggest lessons that I learned early on is investors do not invest in a point. They like to see a line, see that, what you have accomplished, if you're sticking with it. So I knew the second I graduated, I was going to get that check from Tedco here in Maryland. So it was $150K convertible note that we received, and we knew that was our budget to build the prototype. Once it started working, I had already been in contact with Y Combinator. So that became our second check, and we went through YC. Unfortunately, I got very sick through YC, so I was not one of the hot companies coming out of YC. Did not raise much money. But we raised enough to stay alive, and that was supplemented with a grant from the NSF to build our second generation prototype that was kind of more consistent and was not made in my basement. Yeah.
And you mentioned something, a couple of points that I want to highlight for founders listening is investors don't invest in a point, they invest in a line. And I think that's a very valuable quote there, in the sense that, that they want to see multiple points over a period of time of you progressing and the progress of the product or the business over a period of time. And that requires you to kind of establish those relationships prior to ever needing money. And so it sounds like you worked on that. And then you mentioned with YC, before you applied, you already were in talks with them. Can you kind of elaborate on that? Did you, connect with partners or other members? How did you go about building the relationship to get into YC?
So I actually connected with a bunch of companies that did YC and kind of learned how things are done there. So what I learned was, do not overthink the application. That was the biggest thing I learned. Is I said half hour I wrote the application because it was just exactly my thoughts, how I'm talking to you right now. So just between that and having knowing who the partners are, who they would be and what they have done before, I kind of wrote it to them, and that was the strategy.
Nice. That's good advice, kind of connecting with the founders that were already in it, that have been through it, and then, learning the tricks to kind of tailor your application. So For those
Exactly.
that want to get into YC, there's some good tips to listen to. So
Yeah.
you get the YC money. YC didn't seem to maybe be the best possible experience. Seems like you got sick and other things came up.
Yeah.
But you still were able to kind of take the business to the next level. You raised a seed earlier this year. So kind of walk us through the fundraising cycle post YC.
Yeah. So post YC, it gave us about an 8-month runway. And I challenged my team. At that point, we were 4. I was like, hey, by Christmas, you need to get me clinical data. And I had it like on my office door, I had like a counter, like a countdown to Christmas. And if you're a part of the team, you'd think you know what this is about. If you're not a part of the team, you think I'm excited for my present. So anyway, by Christmas, we had 36 samples tested. And I was like, all right, this is exactly what we need to show. So what happened was all these people that I had already met before, we had already had these coffee chats. I was like, hey, do you want to come see our product like live? So we had all these investors come to the hospital at the University of Maryland Medical Center. It's like, all right, sit down here. Let's chat until we get a patient's sample. Right? Some of them said no. Some of them were very excited about the idea. Some of them brought 2 physicians with them to make sure we're legit. And once, think about it. You need days to get results for antibiotic sensitivities. By the time we're having a quick chat, the results came. And that was enough to push to get 2 people to the finish line. One of them was he kept on having a meeting after meeting after meeting, but it was until he saw how the product was working. He was like, all right, I'm in, right? So to me, and once we got the first couple of checks, things got a lot easier. We had new investors who knew other investors and just kept on, adding on. And in the end, we had to stop raising because we needed to focus on kind of building our product and making sure we hit milestones.
And how many investors did you kind of nurture or reach out to and try to build those relationships with? And how many ended up actually investing in the business?
So there was 36. And for all the people that I was talking to, and in this last round, we had 5 of them invest and 4 new investors came on board.
Were these all individuals? Were they VC funds? What was the makeup of them?
It was bunch of everything. So we had 2 VC funds. We had some angels. It was 2 VC funds that had about $750 between the 2, and then everything else was individuals. So we had this awesome advantage here because we're in Maryland. There's something called the Maryland Biotechnology Tax Incentive, whatever, BITC. So for every check that we get, the investor gets 33% back as tax credit. So if you're a part of Maryland, you're getting the tax breaks. If you're outside of Maryland, you're actually getting cash. So that helped us a lot, especially in the current economy.
So this is something that I'm glad you brought up, and I also want to talk about your grants as well. So not really in New York or California like the big venture markets, but in some of these other markets that have less venture activity, there are these different types of credits that investors get and are incentivized to invest in your companies if you file for them and get the proper applications through and you qualify. Well, it's usually around research and development or building out facilities that are going to employ lots of people. There's usually some kind of tax incentive to look for. So if you're outside of California and New York, definitely something worth looking at. So I'm glad you shared that about Maryland. Now, something that also you guys leveraged throughout the entire experience, we talked specifically about going out and getting, raising equity, but you also went out and was about $1.6 million in grant funding. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you identified which grants were available to you and how you went about acquiring those grants?
Right. So, I guess the most basic grant that you get as a startup is the SBIR, the Small Business grants. So NSF, NIH, DoD, they all have them. So we tapped into those. We got one from the NSF, and that was the very first grant. And then there's so many research grants that if you partner with a hospital or a university, you could also get some of those. So, for example, the Maryland Industrial Partnerships, they had a very nice grant program that we always utilize. I think we've received $300,000 from them. The whole project was actually started with a grant from the Maryland Innovation Initiative, where I got some money to provide proof of concept, and this was even before the company formation. So that was another big one. As far as like the large grants that you see, you have to like really fit within the scope of the specific government agency, and like with BARDA and DARPA and the other big agencies, you have to really fit within their scope. So we have not been able to get any of those yet.
And did you guys use any resources? Did you guys do all the grant writing yourself? Did you hire a grant writer, or what was that process like?
So, I mean, there's a part of the grant that you have to write, right? It's your vision, it's your innovation. You have to know exactly what risk you're trying to mitigate with the grant that you're writing. So that part is always ours. The very first grant that we wrote, Kevin and I just, put our heads down and wrote that. It took us pretty much full time for a month and a half. And like, we have a product to build. So we thought it was not the best use of our time. So once we had enough money to hire a grant writer, we would kind of lay everything out, like lay our vision, right? What risk, what aims, and they would make it look pretty for the NSF or the NIH, because the language that you use has to be specific, and that was the most time-consuming thing. Everything else was pretty easy for us.
And roughly, what did you spend on the grant writer and any kind of grant writing services that you might have used?
Right. So it depends. Some places just take a flat fee. Others would split it into two, which is, like for example, for a phase 2, I think we paid for a phase 2 SBIR through the NSF, we paid $17,000, and then there's a 5% success fee. But you're talking about a grant that's over 100 pages in total, so it's like a lot of work. For the phase 1, it's like $7,000 up front and like $2,500 after you get the grant. So it was something like that. To be honest, it sounds like it's a lot, but it's totally worth it.
Yeah, it's effectively free money, non-dilutive money coming into the business, and it is a lot of work, and a lot of businesses don't qualify. But if you are building something heavy in R&D, that could be advantageous to the population as a whole, and or towards the government, or whatever the incentives are to which you are applying a grant. It's something worth, I think, exploring for a lot of businesses that are developing some real new technology, innovative technology. Appreciate you kind of diving in and sharing that experience.
Absolutely.
So, kind of tell us where the business is at today. So you went through YC, you raised about $2 million in your seed. What's the process? Where are you guys at in the clinical trial process, and what are you expecting to happen after?
Yeah, so we're still about a year and a half from the market, and we're doing all of these studies right now with different patient populations, just to make sure that because when we say UTI, like, we're thinking about like healthy individuals who get a UTI, go to a doctor, get basic antibiotics and drink cranberry juice. But in our case, it's a little bit further, right? You have all of these populations, very specific populations, right? So, for example, pregnant women who are post-menopause, these are a little bit. There's already bacteria, with like from the floor that could be in urine. So we needed to address all of these things. And then we discovered another population that was hard. So it's patients with neurogenic disease. So they have no control over the bladder. So they said, like, the physician that we work with was like, if you can make it work with this population, it will work everywhere. So I was like, all right, team, this is exactly what we're doing. So we had our first read with this population, and we had accuracy of 95.9, so which is above our target accuracy. So we still need a couple of months to finish this study, following that, we're just going to do our pre-sub and then run our very official trials, and then we get to the market. I'm not sure I'm allowed to tell you this, but like, we need another raise to get to the market. These things are very, very expensive.
Well, it's to be expected as a business. Future capital needs can always be a requirement. But when it comes to these clinical trials and what you're going through on this part, like, how did you know what to go through? Have you done clinical trials before in your research? Like, what do you have advisors that help navigate the process for you? How did you know what to do?
You just have to surround yourself with people who've done it and who are smarter than you. Because especially you're talking about like medical devices, it's like you have to juggle 15 things at the same time. Like you're talking about regulatory, clinical trials, reimbursement, even like fundraising is different. Grant writing is like weird. It's just, so from day one, I made sure I rely on advisors and more experienced individuals. So, the company started with me and Kevin kind of like building a product, building a prototype for fun almost. And then slowly, so we hired a chief operating officer, Ted Olson. He has, 25, 30 years of experience, and he sold his diagnostic company like 2 years ago. So he's been there, done that. We have, anyway, for everything, it's like there is a person who's experienced, who's telling us exactly what we have to do.
And coming from a research PhD background, also, being an immigrant, moving to the U.S., like, what's it like kind of starting up your first company? And like, what are some of the things that kind of punched you in the face that you weren't really expecting?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. So 10 years ago, I was a refugee. Like,
wow.
If you had asked me like what my biggest hopes were, probably like, I don't know, like the most basic job in the United States would have been like perfect for me. Just like then I came to the US for, do my PhD, and then next thing I know is like when you're a refugee, you think someone will fix it. They will get it done, right? Someone will figure out how to find color in water. But then I was doing a PhD, I was like, wait, I am they now. I have to find the solution that I was relying on someone else to do it. And that was like kind of like changed how I looked at everything. Instead of like just getting a job and cruising. Now I was like, no, I need to find a big problem and I need to focus on it and solve it. I self-identify as a smart guy, so might as well work on a big problem. Antibiotic resistance kind of found me. I did not find it. It's just like for my grandfather, I decided to solve it.
But still, like, going through, the refugee process, which I'm sure is a whole other I have some friends that have gone through those experiences, but with, coming to the U.S., and it's one thing to kind of solve a problem from a research perspective.
Mm-hmm.
To now build a business, convince investors that this business is worth their money, and, getting it ready to take it to the main stage, and go to market, I guess, how'd you feel like a self-identified smart person, sure. Like what did you do to kind of prepare yourself? You surrounded yourself with smart people, but like, what were some of the steps that you took to get the company to the point now?
Well, so I made so many mistakes. I was called stupid so many times, and it's fine because I learned a lot. Like you just be curious, ask questions. I don't think people ask enough questions, so that's what I tried to do. I put myself in so many uncomfortable situations so I could learn, right? Probably. So this is kind of a story, but so first time I present in English, right? It was a conference downtown Baltimore. I was like, all right, I'm proud of my research. Let me go talk about it. I stood there and I pretty much froze. My voice was shaking and it was just terrible. So the next day I tried to, work on it. So I saw flyers like, hey, if you're PhD students, there's this competition, public speaking competition called the 3-minute thesis. I was like, hey, I'm gonna do a 3-minute thesis. So I did the BC one, and then somehow I won state, southern states, United States and Canada. I ended up being like I wanted the whole thing. I was like, so wait, so like, I was so uncomfortable, but in the end I learned how to public speak. And with every single situation, it's just like you keep trying, keep going at it. Like, I mean, of course, honestly, we had 36 investors that I was working with, and then 5 of them signed up. But I didn't tell you about the 150 meetings that I felt very embarrassed after, or like the meeting at 10 p.m. and I couldn't sleep after because of how bad the meeting went, right? So it's just put yourself in the situation and like, what is the worst going to happen? They call you stupid, and then what? Move on.
That is some incredible insights and feedback, and I feel a lot of people are afraid of the no or the denials, and it's upsetting. And it is. It's like doesn't change the fact that it still sucks to be told no, or to have people pass on you. But I think you share some great insights on just put yourself out there and see what opportunities come about, or it's a practice run. And that was my first company. I had no idea how to raise money, man. I had a small business that was doing well and gave me a good lifestyle, but when it came to like my next venture of like raising money, no idea. I burned bridges because I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, I'd say things and people would look at me weird, and I didn't have the refugees, like
that excuse, right?
I had no excuse, I was just bad, but it learned exponentially, from that experience to where, I got so grinded down on that experience, and despite that failure, the next company I went to, basically raised 11 million for, it was 9-day difference. I was like, all right, I had my trial run, and now I'm ready for the big leagues. And that's something that I think a lot of founders, should take into consideration, and not be worried about being perfect, because especially with investors, you can catch them at a bad day. You can, there's just a million things that are outside of your control as a founder that you just should not be concerned about, but you're better off putting yourself out there. So amazing.
And by the way, if you speak English, you are already a step ahead of me in this situation. Like, I knew English from Eminem and 50 Cent. That English did not fly in the United States when I moved here.
That doesn't work so much in the VC world.
Right? So I had to catch up on that as well, which was, by itself, like not exactly easy. To be comfortable speaking with you right now, it took me years.
Yeah. No, and it's actually incredible. Like, 10 years, especially coming to the U.S. with very minimal English, in 2 years, in your 20s, it's extremely difficult. I'm married to an immigrant who, had struggled for a long time to kind of pick up the pace. Now she's great, amazing leader within her own company and everything like that. But it was, definitely a struggle. And she still struggles. They're still definitely like, wait, what do I say in this email here?
Right. I ask people all the time. It's like, hey, is that the word I want? But you have to be okay with it, right? You have to ask.
If you don't ask, then you never know. And, I think that's a great lesson in life for people to take into consideration, whether they're an immigrant or not.
Absolutely.
So let's, we kind of, went off on a little tangent there, but I think it was a good one. I think it was a good story. So kind of going into just the healthcare space as a whole, and there's all kinds of different, verticals within healthcare. There's health tech, but you're really in the meat of it in terms of clinical studies and clinical, research. What are some of the things that you're having to deal with in terms of the bureaucracy and the process that, I guess most business, B2B founders or SaaS founders don't necessarily know about?
Absolutely. I mean, there are hurdles, right? Like the people ask you who's going to pay for it, right? It's a huge question in healthcare, so much harder than that, talking about SaaS and all that, right? So that's one big hurdle. Like, reimbursement is not easy. Of course, going through the FDA is not easy. You have to say the right thing at the right time, and you have to, get the professionals really involved and early on. But having said that, like, we understand that we're building a medical device. We understand that it's people's lives that we're that are, so when I go to a hospital and they run a test on me, I trust that someone vetted this test and this test is legit. And as a founder, I'm on the other side, and I understand why everything is done is to give the patients this peace of mind. And it's because of this process. It's a crazy process. Don't get me wrong, right? Instead of going to the market in 2 months, we're going to market in 2 years. But in the end, it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. It's an awesome process. We're enjoying it. We're 100% enjoying it.
I think you're the first person that's ever talked about the FDA process as, an awesome process. That's, I think it's necessary, and it saves lives because we do it. But most founders, they struggle with it and hate the process, but they, have to abide by it. But that's an interesting outlook.
I have seen the alternative. I have seen where anyone could sell anything with no regulations, and that is terrible, right? You get sick, you go to the hospital, you have to trust them. And that's because of these hurdles, or at least for, part of it. But yeah.
No, it's valid. And when it comes from an investor profile, like when they look at these types of deals, they typically, three potential outcomes. One, crash and burn, you don't get through clinical trials and the tech doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or you get through clinical and you either go to market yourself and you raise a substantial amount of money to do so, and build out that team to get it to market, or you basically sell to a much larger, organization that has the distribution already. Kind of what do you see your future, holding for Aztec?
It seems like acquisition is the most plausible option for us. But as I tell my team always, when people ask this, like, especially internally, it's like, all we can do is build a great company, and then, companies are bought and not sold, right? But just because of what we're building and what it would take to have these distribution and sales channels, acquisition makes the most sense. So we have set a couple of critical milestones that once we hit these milestones, the conversations with these acquirers will resume. And just like with investors, we get coffee with the strategics to make sure that they know what's going on and when we are expecting to get to specific milestones that they would think about acquiring us, or even honestly just build our product for us, at scale or distribution or sales, because we could do that as well.
Gotcha. And when it came to choosing your investors, what did you look for? You met with a lot, 150 meetings that didn't go so well, and then 36 that went better, and then 5 that ultimately came in. How did you end up kind of picking your investors? Was it the only ones that were interested? Was it you had more, and then you were kind of choosing? What was that experience like for you?
Well, the investors have to understand that this is very risky, that we're building something that was not possible before. It is really hard to do what we do. They have to understand that the process takes longer than, cybersecurity or SaaS or anything like that. And they have to believe in the problem we're solving, because in the end, you have to think about the impact as a part of the investment. Now, luckily, our market is huge, considering that even though we're starting UTI, it's like every single infection that could happen in the body, and that takes you into like the $1 trillion market size. So we do not have that issue. But I know from many biotech entrepreneurs, it's like their markets are not that big. So when you go get an investor, the investor has to understand the problem, and they have to believe in the impact that the solution will provide.
And then, are they bringing advice to the table? They're bringing connections to the table. What additional value adds were you hoping for and ended up receiving from your investors?
With investors, the more you ask, the more you get. There's so many investors like, here's money, I'm going to stay out of your way. If you need anything, let me know. I let them know. I think, hey, I'm looking for a new regulatory consultant. I need $1 million very quickly. I need whatever. And they always provide help. You just have to ask. Some of them, of course, ghost me, but others really work hard with us, and they're part of the team.
Well, that's something important to kind of mention. There are still some out there that don't bother or don't help, but always the ones that come in the investment with the expectation to add value, because that's going to protect their investment. I think a lot of founders are scared to be honest with their investors out of fear of, failure or whatever kind of judgment might be passed on them. But really, if you're not asking for help, you're not maximizing that person's investment and their expertise.
Absolutely. And by the way, when you're clear with the investors with the problems that you're facing, they're going to help you fix it. They will. I mean, these are smart people, right? You don't just become an investor. You must have done something right.
And how big is your team now?
We're seven.
Seven
full-timers, 15 total. Yeah.
Okay, so still, relatively small team still.
It's a very small team. Yeah.
No, that's good. And then, as we kind of shared, your amazing story from kind of refugee, PhD to now venture-backed, health tech or healthcare company, or I guess it's probably more diagnostic test company. What's your advice to founders out there that are looking at the healthcare market and considering building a company or already have built a company and how to navigate the waters?
Honestly, the biggest thing is ask for advice, but make sure you're the decision maker. You're the closest one to the company, to the problem. So just, believe in yourself, but ask for advice. And you have to really believe in your solution because it's really not easy. You have to really believe in what you're building. Otherwise, you're going to struggle.
It's true. Yeah, and it's also hard to convince people something that you don't fully believe in. And
absolutely.
And that's across the board. It doesn't matter healthcare, but B2B, doesn't matter what type of business. If the founder themselves has a hard time communicating that they are fully bought in, to the opportunity, then how are they going to recruit? How are they going to raise capital? And that's one of the biggest filters for VCs. They sniff that stuff out almost immediately. If they sense hesitation or lack of commitment or fear, it just shows so obviously in conversation that it usually is a huge deterrent. Or if you're trying to convince yourself as a founder in the middle of a pitch, it's usually pretty obvious. Like, we're cool. Yeah, we're awesome. And we're going to pick this up. Really great to have you on the show. What would you say is the best way to either get a hold of you or follow what you're doing at Aztec Diagnostics?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So Mustafa Al-Adhami, that you could find me there. I try to respond to any messages there that are not trying to sell me something I don't need. And I also have a Twitter, but I have 15 followers, so I don't post there at all.
Not as active.
But yeah, LinkedIn is good. Our website is aztecdx.com. If you reach out, it comes directly to the founders. So we read every single message that we get for collaboration. Otherwise, we're always open.
Awesome. Well, Mustafa, I really appreciate you being on the show today. I'm excited to get this out to our listeners, and can't wait to share this with the world.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. We hope you learned something valuable. And if you did, be sure to let us know in the comments or by hitting that like button. If you're a founder looking to raise capital, be sure to check out our platform, thunder.vc, to use our AI to identify which investors are most qualified to invest in your business. It's free to join. Just go to thunder.vc. Again, that is thunder.vc. And if you're new, we release new episodes every week. And if you or someone you know recently raised a round and want to share your story, be sure to email me at jason@thunder.vc. That's our show, and we hope to see you next week.